Strategies for Real Estate, a 30-minute program updating you on today's real estate market and discussing current issues and opportunities in the desirable Silicon Valley. Plus, interviews with real estate experts giving you insight on what's to come. With your hosts, Tracy Knapp and Dan Lawson. And now, Strategies for Real Estate.
Hello and welcome to our program. I'm Dan Lawson. I'm very happy you're with us tonight. We'll start our program off with our real estate climate segment. Mike Ambrosio from Intero Real Estate, specifically their income property group, he and I will be talking about multifamily commercial properties. That's units that are 5 units and up to 50 units and even higher. And he'll be giving us his perspective and input on market condition. It's something we haven't really spoken much about on Strategies for Real Estate, and that's the commercial element of multifamily, and I think you'll find it very, very informative. We'll then go to our weekly spotlight. A very special guest, Ailita Lito, will be my guest, and she's a feng shui practitioner, and she's going to be talking about what she does when she goes into a building or your home, and the benefits and advantages of using a feng shui practitioner to bring more peace and balance into your home. So with that said, it's now time for our real estate climate segment. Hello and welcome to our real estate climate segment. It's now my pleasure to introduce Mike Ambrosio from Intero Real Estate. Mike, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's good to have you back on the show. You know, it's a bit unique, as I mentioned in my intro, that we have someone talking about the income-producing properties and those over 4 units, which is pretty much standard for a residential multifamily property.
Yeah.
And but things that are 5 or more really fall into a different category. Mm-hmm. So why don't you just give us some overview of your expertise in this area, and then we'll delve into inventories and some of the other elements.
Yeah, so at Intero, we actually do have a commercial division, and myself and a business partner, Scott, we head up the income property group at Intero Los Gatos. And it's a really interesting market right now. I mean, inventory is low. There's about 20,000 of these properties in Santa Clara County, but we're really only looking at, and I brought some numbers, between 2 and 4 units, there's only 86 properties for sale right now.
Out of 2,000?
Out of 20,000.
Oh, 20,000.
And 5 plus units, there's only 21 for sale on the MLS. Now the MLS, the multiple listing service, is probably the most primary resource that they list these properties on, but there's other commercial websites too. But that just gives you kind of an idea of how little there is of these properties.
Well, this is a real interesting perspective as well. You know, it's been very interesting that, you know, week after week I have realtors come on like yourself, but those that specialize in residential properties and so forth. And for over a year, we've had very low inventories, and it seems like they're starting to rise a bit.
Yeah.
So how does I know you do residential transactions as well. Correct. So how's the residential and this commercial multifamily element that you work in, how is it tracking? Is it tracking together? What's driving this market? It's actually surprising, in a nice way. It's surprising, though, to me to hear that you're having your own inventory crunch on these commercial properties.
I would say it was tracking pretty closely with residential until residential started creeping up recently, and I'd say there was a level off with the multifamily. It's still pretty low, and these properties are being purchased really quickly because it's a good investment, frankly, and that's why a lot of people don't sell them. They keep them for a long time. They don't want to get rid of them because they've bought them for a long time ago for a good price, and now their return's so much higher. Right. And I'll get into that a little bit with cap rates and gross rent multiplier and whatnot. But they're such a good investment. People don't often unload them. So
yeah, especially with the trend that when you look back at the cycle of people going into foreclosure or losing their homes, they couldn't buy, so they had to live somewhere. So it really has added a huge push into the rental market.
Yeah, and that's another huge driving force right now is the rental market's so hot. It's not that hard to rent out any type of property if it's priced right.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Like selling property.
That's exactly it as well. So. So you're saying it's out of over 20,000 units, there's more or less 80, less than 100?
Yeah, about 100.
About 100 units
on the MLS, yeah.
Wow. And what is the average price range? You know, so break it down as you see fit, like in the smaller units on up. What would be an average price?
Yeah, I would say, you know, it depends on the market it's in, obviously, just like anything. But typically, maybe a fourplex in downtown San Jose could range from around 800,000 to maybe 1.1. But if you buy a fourplex in Palo Alto or Cupertino, you're looking at, you know, 1.5. That range too. So it just depends on the market. It also depends.
I mean, it somewhat tracks along with residential, because depending on the location of that property, it could drive the price. So I know I asked a very generic question, a very generalized question, but let's say.
And the income's important too. I mean, that's a major driving factor for the price, is how much income is it getting. Right. So that's a big deal.
Well, so let's move to that, because that was another thing you had mentioned, and I wanted to ask you about cap rates and some of these factors. So. Many of our viewers probably have never even heard about a cap rate or gross rent multipliers and so forth. So why don't you educate our viewers?
Yeah, so a cap rate is basically called a capitalization rate, and it's your net operating income divided by your purchase price. So average cap rates in this area range from 3 to 6 or 7%. You know, you can see lower ones and you can see higher ones, but it's a lot more rare. So the way the cap rate works is, let's say you had a property, usually in, I don't want to say lower end areas, but areas that aren't as high priced, you're going to have higher cap rates because your barrier to entry is lower, but your net operating income is going to be higher. So
let's make the math easy. Let's say someone were to buy like a 5-unit for $1 million.
Yeah, right.
Just generally speaking.
Yeah.
And you said fourplex between 8 and 800 and $1 million, and maybe a 5-plex or 6 might be more like 1.5 or whatever, but I'm just trying to keep the math simple.
So about a unit like that's going to run in the 4 to 5% cap rate range. But let's say you bought a fourplex in Cupertino and you spend another $500,000 to $700,000 on it, your cap rate's going to be lower, because your operating income is going to be somewhat similar, but the purchase price was so much higher, and then you do the math, it's going to be a lower percentage.
Right. So it's. When you're ready to list a property, of course you look at what the cap rate would be, and do you adjust the cap rate, or let's say the ask price accordingly to what that cap rate is? Does it help drive the purchase price?
It does, and especially if you do it correctly. Now, there's a lot of properties on the MLS that have different expense numbers in there, and sometimes they're not the most accurate.
Right.
So just through the knowledge that myself and my business partner have, we kind of plug in our own numbers and come up with the cap rate we think is correct. So it just all depends. It's a deal by deal basis. That's why we have to watch these every day, what's coming on the market, and then do our own analysis on them.
It's when you and I first met, I don't know, about a year ago or something like that, whatever it was. You asked me, do I do commercial lending? And the reason I don't is it's a completely different element. It's for those that have gray hair like me, it's like beta or VHS, or maybe little younger people might say, well, it's like the old Apple system and Windows. They never communicated, and they don't really do a very good job now even, but they're closer. And that's how this lending piece is. It's a loan, but there are so many different dynamics to it. So it's interesting to me. So if let's say I owned a rental property, like a 5-plex or something like this, or 10-plex, whatever the case may be, and I had you come over to talk to me about, I expressed an interest in listing the house. Walk me through how your presentation would be, and educating me on what I should be looking for as far as a sale price.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would want to know is, what are you getting for rents?
Right.
So what are you getting for rents? What are your operating costs? Typically with these types of properties, you have a rent roll, and you're tracking all your operating costs for your CPA, and then then what have you done to the property? So the big deal on these types of properties is, what major upgrades have you done? Have you redone the plumbing? Have you done the electrical? Have you put in granite into the kitchen? Is there new windows? Because those types of amenities will drive rent prices. So if you've done some upgrades, you're typically going to be getting higher rents. Now, if you haven't, then that's a whole nother story. But the good thing about properties like that maybe haven't had all the upgrades, is that an investor can come in and see that this property has potential. If I do put these upgrades in, I'm eventually going to get I'm going to get higher rents for that.
Correct.
And that's really attractive to some investors, because they're going to up their price of the property and the value by doing things like that. So
I see.
That's kind of like a flip type of investment property, but they're not selling it. They're just going to go in and fix it up and then get higher rents, and therefore get more income.
Right. It's almost like, do they do it in a way when if I were now a buyer and you were representing me to look to purchase a property, and I was going in with the thought that, you know, this could make a lot of sense, and I've got the capital to do improvements,
Right.
but all of them have long-term leases. What's the strategy for a buyer?
That's important too, because that's another question. I appreciate you bringing that back up. Is month-to-month rents are going to be a little bit more attractive because they can basically at that point go in and do whatever they want within the next 60 to 90 days.
They could give notice and
but
then
if
off I go.
If these tenants are locked into long-term contracts, that could be a deterrent for some investors. So that is a great point.
Yeah, I see. Okay. Well, we've got a few minutes left, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a bit about 1031 exchanges and some of the ways to defer tax and optimize the investment of these types of properties.
Yeah. So I want to preface this with I'm not a 1031 exchange expert, because there's guys that do that. But obviously I know a little bit about it because I use that as a point of conversation when I'm talking to investors.
Exactly. Both of us are very knowledgeable about tax consequence,
Yeah.
but we're not tax accountants and we don't give tax advice.
Exactly.
So this is friendly conversation.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
So basically, a lot of times when these investors will sell a property like this, they like to avoid taxes by transferring the basis to a different property.
Right.
Now they are going to pay a higher tax. They are going to pay higher taxes based on the 1 1/4 tax they're going to pay on the new property.
The property taxes will be higher because they're buying a new home.
But they're not going to get taxed on the income they gain from selling the property.
Correct.
But it's typically got to be a like property, so an investment property to an investment property. The other part of that is you have a certain amount of time to identify a replacement property.
And what is the approximate time?
It's 45 days for identification. So what I've been doing lately with some of the investment properties we're selling is you ask for and that's a short amount of time, especially in a tight inventory market.
Long.
Yeah. So what we do is you ask for a longer escrow period because that gives you a little bit more time to search around, and then your 45 days. So typically, if you let's say you get a 60-day escrow period, that's great. Plus you have another 45 after that, after you close, to do that. So you can kind of manipulate it that way a little bit, and it's not illegal or anything like that. It's just getting a longer escrow, and then you have your 45 days. The other piece to it is you have 120 days to close after that. So those are some of the timelines. There's some other stipulations, but those are the big ones.
And I think one thing that's important is when you say like for like, it's staying an investment or a rental property to a rental property.
Yeah.
So you could, if you cleared, let's say you sold a 10-plex for $2 million, you could go out and buy $400,000 or $500,000 single family homes.
Yeah, you could if it's an investment property.
As long as it's an investment property.
Yeah.
Well, perfect.
Yeah.
Well, very informative. Thanks for being with us today, Mike.
Of course, yeah. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Have a great Q4, and we'll look forward to having you on next year. We'll
Sounds
take
good.
another look at where the market's like.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
All right, you bet. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Well, again, on behalf of all of my guests, I hope you enjoyed today's show and look for us next week. But in the meantime, do something nice for someone who's not expecting it, and just watch the magic and miracle happen around you. Thanks for being with us tonight. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.